I was deep into my work, completely lost in lines of code, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message read, "Check out this address, your wife might be there." I frowned, thinking it had to be some kind of prank. Laura would never cheat on me. Shaking my head, I dismissed the message as nonsense and returned to my work, letting my focus slowly come back to the project I had at hand. The next day, my phone buzzed again, this time with a call from that same unknown number. Irritated, I answered, "Who is this? I don't have time for jokes." The voice on the other end sounded serious. "You need to check this address. Trust me." I hung up, frustrated but still unconvinced. I pushed the thought aside and dived back into my work. There were deadlines to meet. A few hours later, the phone rang again, and it was the same number. By now, my curiosity was piqued. "All right, what do you want?" I asked, feeling both annoyed and intrigued. The voice insisted, "Just go to the address and see for yourself." With a sigh, I finally agreed, thinking it would be better to get it over with and prove it was just a prank. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, my mind racing with doubts and questions. The drive was short, but my thoughts were spinning. Laura and I had a quiet life in our modest home. We both worked hard, although money was always tight. I freelanced as a programmer, often working late into the night to make ends meet, while Laura worked as a cashier at a local grocery store. When I arrived at the address, it turned out to be a small, nondescript hotel. The lobby was nearly empty, with only a bored-looking receptionist and a couple of travelers checking in. Feeling out of place in my old, worn sweater, I walked up to the desk. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, barely glancing up from her screen. Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I'm looking for my wife, Laura Thompson." She frowned and tapped a few keys. "Sorry, but I can't give out guest information." Frustrated, I thanked her and stepped back, unsure what to do next. I decided to wait in the lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of Laura or get some hint of what was happening. Minutes turned into an hour, and still no sign of Laura. My mind was racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. Eventually, I decided it was time to go home. Maybe it was all a big misunderstanding. I would talk to Laura when she got back and sort this out. Who goes to these lengths to play a prank? I muttered to myself as I walked back to my car. When I got home, it was late, and the house was quiet, with only the hum of the refrigerator filling the space. Laura was working the night shift at the store, so the place felt emptier than usual. I tossed my keys onto the table and sank into my chair, replaying the day's events in my mind. I considered calling the number back to tell whoever it was to leave me alone, but I decided against it. I had work to do. I set up my laptop, pulling out the notes I had jotted down earlier. My cat, Mr. Whiskers, jumped up onto the keyboard, nuzzling my hand. I scratched behind his ears, and he settled down next to me. Normally, he slept beside me at night, but it seemed even he could sense something was off. I went to the refrigerator, made myself a couple of sandwiches, and poured a glass of sweet tea. The food felt comforting as I headed back to my desk, balancing my plate and drink carefully. Still not quite satisfied, I grabbed a handful of chocolate chip cookies from the cupboard, munching on a few as I sat down. I thought about my lifestyle, nearing 40, and already my eyesight was deteriorating from too many hours spent staring at screens. My back constantly ached from sitting hunched over, and the late-night snacks were not helping. I was relieved we did not have children yet. Fitting a baby into this life seemed impossible. Mr. Whiskers watched me with half-closed eyes as I took a bite of my sandwich. I laughed to myself, thinking that this whole situation was probably just a stupid prank. Laura was wonderful, and I knew how lucky I was to have her. She was always supportive, even when money was tight and times were tough. She never complained, no matter what. Finishing my sandwich, I washed it down with the sweet tea, savoring the familiar taste. My back twinged as I leaned forward, and I made a mental note to stretch more, though I knew I would probably forget. I got up and did a few squats, some stretches, and felt a bit of relief. As I worked late into the night, my thoughts drifted back to Laura. She really was a wonderful wife. We met back in college, both of us just ordinary people with no flashy looks or personalities. Laura was studying marketing, while I was in computer science. I remember our first conversation. She was passing by with a friend, talking about her laptop, which had broken down. I mustered up some courage and offered to fix it. If she had been the flashy type, I doubt I would have had the nerve to approach her. After that, we started seeing each other, and by the time we graduated, we were a full-fledged couple. I remember those early days fondly. We'd study together, take breaks to grab cheap coffee, or sneak snacks. Our dates were simple: picnics in the park, movie nights with rented DVDs, and long walks where we talked about our dreams. Moving in together after graduation felt natural. We made my small apartment our own, decorating it with second-hand furniture and making it cozy. At 25, we got married. It was a modest wedding, but it was perfect in its simplicity, surrounded by close friends and family. Life after marriage had its challenges, especially financially. My freelance work was unpredictable, and Laura's job at the grocery store did not pay much, but we managed. We budgeted carefully, saved where we could, and supported each other. Despite the struggles, we found happiness in the life we had built together. In the small, everyday things, movie marathons on rainy days, late-night talks about our hopes and fears, and quiet evenings spent in each other's company, I found real happiness. Laura's laughter could turn my whole day around, and her smile made everything worthwhile. Neither of us had been with anyone else. I was her first, and I was sure she was mine. That certainty was part of why those strange messages bothered me so much. They felt completely out of place in our steady, uncomplicated life. I glanced at the clock. It was close to midnight, and Laura's shift would be ending soon. I looked forward to seeing her. I knew she would be tired, but she would still flash me that smile, ask about my day, and maybe we would catch an episode of our favorite show before bed. I chuckled, thinking again that the messages were probably just a stupid prank. After hours of work, I finally saved the last bit of code and shut down my laptop. As I leaned back, a thought crossed my mind. I had considered applying for a job at a company, but the idea of being around people all day was off-putting. Even though some companies promised me an office with complete privacy, I just preferred working alone, without the need to interact. It was odd, even to me, that I had agreed to share this story with anyone. By the time I wrapped everything up, it was almost 5:30 in the morning. I had finished my sandwiches and tea, and I knew Laura would be home soon. I got up, stretched, did a few squats to shake off the fatigue, and then decided to take a quick shower. The warm water helped clear my head and wash away the exhaustion. After the shower, I dressed in fresh clothes, feeling a bit more energized and ready to start the day with my wife. Just as I was about to put on my shoes, I heard the front door creak open. Laura walked in, looking worn out but smiling brightly, like we were still newlyweds in our first year of marriage rather than 13 years in. "Hey, Mason," she greeted, her voice warm and cheerful despite her exhaustion. "Hey, Laura," I replied, giving her a hug. "How was your shift?" She sighed, dropping her bag to the floor. "Oh, it was a night, let me tell you. This one customer," I listened as she told me how a man had rushed in just before closing, desperate for a particular brand of baby formula they were out of. Apparently, he was near tears. Laura managed to find a few cans in the back, which seemed to make his night. "You should have seen his face," she said, shaking her head with a smile. "It's moments like these that make the job worth it, even when I'm dead tired." I smiled back, admiring her kindness. "You're amazing, you know that." She laughed softly. "You always say that. So, how was your night? Did you finish your project?" "Yeah, finally wrapped it up," I replied, but I've been thinking about looking for a company job. Then again, you know me, I just don't want to deal with people. Laura placed a hand on my shoulder. You know what's best for you, Mason. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Her unwavering support always touched me. We chatted a while longer, catching up on the little things. Despite the strange messages and the unease they brought, moments like these reminded me of how lucky I was to have Laura. The next morning, I woke up with a rare sense of relief. The big project was done, and payment was already in my account. It was a day off for both of us, and Laura had a night shift later, so we decided to do something out of the ordinary. How about a hike? Laura suggested over breakfast. A hike? I raised an eyebrow. We haven't done that in ages. Exactly, she said with a grin. We could use some fresh air and a change of scenery. We packed a simple lunch, grabbed our gear, and drove to a nearby nature reserve. The weather was perfect, clear skies, warm sunlight and a gentle breeze. We spent hours exploring the trails, talking about everything and nothing, just enjoying each other's company away from the usual distractions. At one point, we stumbled upon a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. In that peaceful moment, Laura hesitantly brought up something we had avoided for years. Mason, she began, I've been thinking a lot about having a child. I know we've talked about this before, but I really want to be a mom. I looked out at the horizon. Laura, you know how I feel about this. We can barely get by as it is. A child would only add to our financial burdens. It's not just about the money, Mason, she replied. Think about the joy and the fulfillment it could bring. I took her hand and said, I understand, but we wouldn't be able to give a child everything we'd want to. Our life is good as it is, we don't need a child to feel complete. Laura looked down, clearly disappointed, but nodded. I know, Mason. I just needed to say it out loud. Thanks for listening. As we sat there in silence, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from the unknown number. It's no use ignoring the obvious. You need to face this, now or later. Frustrated, I typed a quick reply, I've had enough of you, and blocked the number. Laura noticed my irritation and asked what happened. Just a difficult client, I lied. I won't take his order. Everything's fine. We continued our hike, but the conversation about a child stayed with me. On our way back to the car, we came across a family struggling to set up a picnic table. Seeing them in a bind, I offered to help, and Laura joined in. Together, we managed to get the table set up, much to their appreciation. Thank you so much, the mother said, smiling. We were about ready to give up on this thing. No problem, I replied, feeling an unexpected warmth from the simple act of helping. Laura gave me a knowing look, a hint of our earlier conversation in her eyes. Back at home, we settled in for a quiet evening. Laura got ready for her night shift while I decided to relax with a book. Despite the lingering thoughts and that odd message, I felt content. As Laura left for work, she kissed me goodbye, her eyes reflecting the unspoken wish for a child. After she left, I settled into my favorite chair with my book. It was a gripping novel, and I got lost in its pages, drawn into the story's characters and twists. Then my phone vibrated again, pulling me out of the fictional world. It was another message from an unknown number. The text read, even though you chose the wrong path, I am giving you another chance. You're missing out on a lot. Then it listed another address. Frustrated and fed up, I clenched my phone, feeling a growing sense of unease. I angrily typed back, forget you, and blocked the number, trying to shake off the frustration. I attempted to return to my book, but the message lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. The address felt like it was burrowing into my thoughts, and despite my initial anger, I could not shake the feeling that I needed to check it out. Finally, I made up my mind. I did not know why, but something compelled me to go. I grabbed my jacket, stuffed my phone into my pocket, and headed out. The streets were dark, the city blanketed in the stillness of night. Laura's shift had started about an hour and a half ago, and her absence weighed on me. I drove through the quiet streets, with the glow of streetlights casting eerie shadows on the buildings. The address led me to a worn-down motel on the outskirts of town, definitely not the same place as before. This area felt run down, almost like a forgotten part of the city. The motel looked abandoned at first glance, with just 4 cars in the parking lot. I parked and walked toward the entrance, where a dim glow from a few weak bulbs was the only source of light. Despite its disrepair, there was an odd sense of order, as if someone took just enough care to keep the place functional. The darkness intensified the unsettling feeling in my gut. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped into the motel's lobby, the air stale and silent. As I stood in the dim lobby, I heard a voice from the shadows. "Is there anything I can help you with?" It was an elderly woman's voice, soft and a bit raspy. I turned to the left, spotting a small reception area about 10 meters away. There, behind the counter, sat an old woman with a sweet smile and an air of kindness. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Have you seen a woman about this tall, with brown hair and blue eyes?" "Her name is Laura." The old woman's eyes sparkled with recognition. "Yes, she was here about an hour ago. She asked for a double room, and I gladly gave it to her." A cold wave of shock swept over me. "A double room?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Where is she?" "Which room?" The old lady's smile faded slightly. "And who might you be?" "I'm her husband," I said, barely holding my composure. "She's supposed to be on the night shift at the grocery store right now." The woman's eyes widened with concern. "Well, she's in room 17. Down the hall and to the right." I thanked her quickly and hurried down the hall. As I approached room 17, I could hear muffled voices from inside. My heart pounded as I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out what was being said. They were talking about money. I heard Laura's voice say, "That's the price we agreed on." A man replied, "All right, here you go. Keep it, it's well earned." I felt my jaw drop as the conversation continued. The man said, "Honestly, I didn't expect someone so plain to be such a bomb in bed. I would love to spend more nights with you." Laura's soft voice responded, "Thank you, but it's my job. Mostly, sex happens without feelings." The man chuckled. "I understand, that's the business. But in bed, you're just incredible. Here, take this as a tip." I heard Laura thank him, sounding pleased. The man laughed. "You know, I can hardly believe my luck. I never imagined someone like you would be this skilled." Laura chuckled back. "Well, you get what you pay for. I aim to please, and it seems like I succeeded." The man laughed. "You sure did. Your programmer is one lucky guy." Laura replied, "Yeah, he definitely is." I heard something whispered that I couldn't quite make out, followed by Laura's laugh, a sound that once brought me joy but now filled me with rage. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. The door looked flimsy, so I kicked it as hard as I could. It flew open with a loud crash. Inside was a shabby 2-room setup. Laura was sitting on the bed to the left, completely undressed, next to a man I had never seen before. She was gathering the money he had given her, stuffing it into her purse. The room was dimly lit, making the entire scene feel surreal. For a moment, there was only silence, and I was paralyzed with shock. The silence broke when the man stood up, leaning over to kiss Laura on the cheek as he dressed. Laura looked deeply embarrassed. "Well," he began, "looks like our work here is done. I'll be on my way." He walked toward the exit, and, still in shock, I let him pass. As he reached the door, he paused, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Your wife is incredible in bed, especially when she takes charge. Do not let her go." He laughed and walked out. Laura scrambled to get dressed, attempting to cover herself so I wouldn't see her like that. Finally, I found my voice. "What the hell is this, Laura?" She sighed, meeting my gaze with a mixture of guilt and resignation. "I didn't want you to find out like this. I really wanted to keep you out of it, but I guess it's time I tell you. I've been doing this for 8 months." I stared at her, stunned. 8 months? And you are not pregnant? How? "Birth control," she replied, her tone flat. "And thankfully, I haven't caught anything." "Where does the money go, Laura?" I asked, anger building. "I haven't seen any improvement in our finances." She took a deep breath, sitting down on the bed now fully dressed. "My father, he got into trouble with drugs. He owes a lot of money to a gang. They threatened to kill him if he didn't pay up. So they came to me, told me I had to find the money or they'd make sure he'd never get out of debt alive." A surge of anger and confusion coursed through me. "Why did you not tell me? Why did you not go to the police?" "I was scared," Laura admitted, her voice trembling. "These people are serious. They could easily come after us. My father's relatives have him locked up in a hospital to help him recover, but the debts are still there. If I can keep this up for another 6 months, I'll be able to pay it off." I stared at her, trying to process everything. "I always thought you were so ordinary, the kind of woman no one would ever notice in that way. I never imagined, well, I guess I forgot that men pay for sex, not beauty or appearance." Laura's face was full of pleading. "Please, Mason, don't go to the police. I'm terrified of what could happen. Just let me do this for 6 more months, and then it'll all be behind us." "And what if you get pregnant?" I asked, my voice cold. "Or if you catch something? Will you have to keep doing this to cover more medical costs?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'll be careful, Mason. I swear. But I just do not see any other way to save my father and keep us safe." I ran my hand through my hair, trying to wrap my head around this. "So, all this time, you've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" Laura's shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands. "I know, Mason. I know it's wrong. I hated every second of it, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. My father's life was at stake. Why didn't you come to me?" I demanded. "We could have figured something out together. We're supposed to be a team." She looked up at me, regret in her eyes. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to know this side of me, and I was terrified that going to the police wouldn't really protect us. I shook my head, anger and sorrow fighting within me. "This isn't just about money or your father, Laura. This is about trust. You've broken my trust in the worst way possible." She reached out, but I stepped back. "Mason, please," she whispered. "I'm begging you. Just give me 6 more months, and we can put this all behind us." "And what if something goes wrong?" I asked, my voice rising. "What if they come after us anyway? What if you get hurt, or worse?" She replied softly, "I'm careful. I take precautions, and I only deal with clients who aren't violent." I laughed bitterly. "Clients who aren't violent? You're risking your life every time you go out, and for what? For a father who put himself in this mess." Laura's face crumpled, and she began to cry. "I know, Mason. I know it sounds insane, but he's my father. I can't just let him die." I felt a pang of sympathy, but my anger was still there. "And what about us, Laura?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, but I want to try. I want to make things right. Please, just give me a chance." I stood there, torn between the love I had for her and the betrayal I felt. I don't know if I can ever forgive this. She nodded, wiping her eyes as we left the motel. The old woman at the reception wished us a good night and a happy family life. We thanked her ironically and stepped outside, where I noticed one of the cars was gone, likely Laura's client. I helped her into the car, and we drove home in silence, the weight of what had happened hanging heavily between us. Finally, I broke the silence. "What about your job at the store, Laura? Does this pay so much more than that?" "They pay a lot more," she replied. "I even had to ask an old friend from the store to cover for me. Sometimes, I still go out and work with him." When we got home, it was around 3 in the morning. Exhausted and emotionally drained, we went straight to bed. The next morning, Laura told me she needed a short break. "I need to get away from all this, just a vacation from work, not from everything else, unfortunately." I looked at her, my heart aching. "Laura, don't go anywhere, and please don't go back to this. We'll figure something out." Needing to clear my head, I decided to take a walk. As I strolled through the quiet streets, my phone buzzed with a message from the same unknown number. "So, you don't regret following my advice, do you?" I replied, "No, I don't regret it. Thank you. But who are you, and why are you messaging me?" The response came quickly. "I think it's time for us to meet." He sent an address to a small pastry shop nearby. I decided to walk there. The pastry shop was small, with just 4 tables. Each table was occupied. An elderly woman sat at one, reading the news on her phone. A teenager, maybe 14 years old, was absorbed in a game on his phone at the second table. The third table held a young student, probably around 20, staring off into space. At the fourth table was a man around my age, sipping coffee and looking nervously around. I figured this had to be the person I was supposed to meet. I approached him and asked, "Excuse me, are you the one I blocked twice and cursed out?" He looked up at me and smiled. "Yes, I'm the one who tried to put you on the right path. Took you longer than I thought, but I'm glad you finally did." The man had a striking appearance, dressed in a way that seemed almost timeless. He wore a hat that reminded me of styles from the early 20th century. His face was weathered but sharp, with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me. His jaw was strong, his beard neatly trimmed. His clothes were an unusual mix of old-fashioned and modern, a perfectly tailored suit that would have suited a mafia boss, complete with polished shoes and a vintage pocket watch peeking out from his vest. His presence was intimidating and compelling all at once. I sat down across from him, my mind racing with questions. He looked at me through his glasses, the lenses seeming to obscure his pupils entirely. Before I could speak, he started talking. "You don't need to know who I am," he said bluntly. "No introductions are necessary." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you actually wear clothes like that every day?" He smirked, adjusting his hat. "Naturally. I even sleep like this. You could say I'm hiding in plain sight." I could not hide my curiosity. "Hiding from whom?" He met my gaze steadily. "I'm part of the gang your wife has been paying off." His tone was calm and steady. "But now, I work as an informant for the government." I felt my jaw drop. "An informant? And you're in charge of my wife's case?" He nodded. "She had to come to me to hand over the money she made." I struggled to process this. "How did you even get my number?" He smiled, a sly look in his eyes. "My colleagues have resources. We're a large organization, a gangster group with wide connections." It wasn't hard. Anger flared up in me. "And what do you want from me now?" He leaned forward. "The government is preparing a major operation to take down the gang. To ensure the success of this operation, your wife needs to continue her work. Any deviation from her role could jeopardize everything." I was indignant. "You expect me to just sit back and accept this? To let my wife keep prostituting herself?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. If you interfere, you will become an enemy of the gang. And, since I have given you fair warning, you will also be considered an enemy of the government. A sense of dread settled over me. What am I supposed to do? Nothing, he replied calmly. Live your life. Keep writing your software. Your wife must not suspect anything. She needs to continue as she has until the government is prepared to raid the gang. He stood up, adjusting his hat one last time. There is nothing more for us to discuss. It is time for me to leave. Without another word, he walked away, disappearing into the bustling streets. I sat there, bewildered and overwhelmed. A few moments later, I heard the voice of the pastry shop worker. Sir, are you going to order anything? Snapping out of my daze, I answered, yes, yes. I will have an éclair and a latte. The éclair tasted like sawdust, and the latte did little to calm my frayed nerves. I sat there for a while longer, letting the weight of the situation settle over me. Eventually, I stood up and decided to take a walk. The cool air helped clear my head a bit as I wandered through the city streets, a myriad of questions swirling in my mind. The first thing that puzzled me was why I had gone to that hotel in the first place, especially since the receptionist had told me my wife was not there. Then there was the strange attire of the man I had just met. How could someone dressed so conspicuously be hiding? These questions nagged at me, so I sent a message to the mysterious man, then continued my walk, trying to make sense of everything. My phone buzzed with a reply, you mixed up the addresses and went to the wrong place. As for my attire, you have no idea how members of our gang dress. Do not write or call me again. If I need to tell you something, I will reach out first. I sighed, pocketing my phone. When I returned home, Laura was already gone. Deciding to focus on something productive, I logged on to the freelance exchange platform where I usually found work. Another client had requested a program, so I accepted the job and threw myself into the task. Hours flew by, and before I knew it, evening had arrived and the software was nearly complete. Laura returned home, looking exhausted. How was your day? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. You know how it was, she replied, with a touch of bitterness. But I really believe that in 6 more months, I'll be out of this mess. I pretended to accept this, nodding in agreement. I understand, I said, forcing a small smile. Laura seemed relieved, her shoulders relaxing as she smiled back. Thank you, Mason. It means a lot to me that you are supporting me, she said. I watched her move around the room, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the one I had discovered. Despite my efforts to focus on work, my mind kept drifting back to our situation. I had to protect her, no matter how twisted our reality had become. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Laura made dinner, and we ate together in relative silence. Afterward, she went to bed early, exhausted from her day. I stayed up, working on the final touches of the program. As the hours ticked by, I found solace in the familiar patterns of coding. It was something I could control, unlike the chaos that had invaded our lives. Eventually, I saved my work and shut down my computer. The program was nearly complete, and I felt a small sense of accomplishment. I stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back and neck from hours of sitting. I glanced toward the bedroom where Laura was sleeping. She had seemed genuinely happy when I pretended to be okay with her situation. I climbed into bed beside Laura, who stirred slightly but did not wake up. The next few days passed in a blur of routine and cautious optimism. Laura and I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. From time to time, we went for walks together, trying to enjoy ourselves and forget the weight of our reality. Once, Laura stayed out late, something that had become less frequent. When she finally came home, I could not hide my concern. Be careful with all these clients, I told her. They are different. You never know what might happen. She tried to calm me down. Mason, I have been doing this for a while now. Everything has been fine so far. Plus, I always carry protection. When I tried to ask her what exactly she meant by protection, she evaded the question. I decided not to press her further. 3 weeks later, I was once again sitting at my keyboard, immersed in code, when I received a message from that stranger. It read, "The operation will be carried out soon, from day to day, at a specific date and time which I will not disclose. Just know that your wife's ordeal will soon be over." No need to reply. I breathed a sigh of relief and continued typing, feeling a small weight lift off my shoulders. The next evening, as I was lying in bed, ready to drift off to sleep, Laura returned home. She looked as she usually did, tired but composed. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, and it seemed the tension between us had eased. We were no longer as embarrassed about the fact that Laura was working as a prostitute. It had become a part of our strange, shared reality. But the following day, Laura came home looking different, radiant, almost. I noticed her smile immediately, with tears of joy in her eyes. "I do not have to do it anymore," she exclaimed. I pretended to be surprised. "Are you serious? How?" "Apparently, the gang is getting raided. They told me I do not have to work for them anymore. It is finally over, Mason." She was overjoyed, as was I, even though I knew this was coming. Laura returned to her job at the store with a renewed sense of joy. I had hoped to hear something about the operation on television, expecting news reports or headlines announcing the takedown of the gang. But the government kept silent. There was nothing on the news about it. No arrests, no raids. It was as if the operation had never happened. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to a new normal for us. Laura and I focused on rebuilding our relationship and planning for the future. The uncertainty about the gang and the operation lingered in the back of my mind, but I chose to focus on the present and the small victories we were achieving together. I thought about writing to the unknown number to ask for confirmation or clarity on what had actually happened. However, the stranger had warned me not to contact him, and I decided to heed that advice. In the end, I never reached out to him again, and to this day, I have not. Reflecting on my relationship with Laura, I know some people might not understand my decision. But I never saw her actions as a betrayal. She felt she had no choice, and her actions were driven by a need to protect her family. The idea of divorce never crossed my mind. As time went on, I found myself slowly beginning to consider Laura's thoughts about having a child. It seemed like it could be a powerful motivator for us both to grow, both personally and financially. These days, I have added more walking into my life. Whenever I need to go somewhere by car, I leave early and walk instead, often passing by that pastry shop where I met the stranger. His image is still vivid in my memory. I can still see him, sitting on that stool with a cup of coffee in his hands.
What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.
Bye bye.